Welcome to the Fabulous Fifties and Beyond. I'm Jim Pollard with my wife Jeanetta, and we're hosting our program today. Today we're going to be talking about stages of life, and we have with us two retired missionaries with the North American Mission Board and the work that they've done throughout the United States and even still doing in some relief work and different things. You stay tuned, we're going to have an interesting show.
And he'd say, go with what you got. Start from where you are. Give it your best shot. Keep reaching for that star. Get in the race. Keep your own pace. Keep moving and never stop. Just go. Go with what you got.
Welcome back. The people that we have on our show today are friends of Jeanetta's for a lot of years. I won't tell you how many, but I tell you that she went to junior college with them, so that'll give you some kind of significance of how many years they've been friends. They're Norman and Patty Wallace, and they're going to talk to us about some of the things that they've been doing. They've come back to this area to retire.
Yep.
Got through with school, went all over the place, and came back home, I guess.
Sort of.
Sort of did. So we're glad to have you all on our show today. It's always exciting to hear about some of the things that people have been doing down through the years. We kind of did that. We ran around. We were the gypsies, and then we ended up back here at her home when we got ready to retire.
We went to school together at junior college, as he said, Bethel College in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, which we know no longer exists.
Yep.
That was, I don't even know how many years it's been gone, but it's been gone several years.
Since 1965.
Since 1965. And I was asking y'all, I wasn't sure, did y'all meet at Bethel for the first time?
Yes, we did.
That's where y'all met, and
Very first week of school.
the very first week of school. And little did you know that you would end up with each other for life, right?
Yeah.
But you talked about that after you left Bethel, you went to one college. Where did you go?
Yeah, I went to Texas, to Baylor.
And I went to Carson Newman in Jefferson City, Tennessee.
So you did you correspond all that time?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, mostly letters, few phone calls, but a few.
Back then, it was a few phone calls. I mean, you didn't just, now the kids get on the phone, and hey, well, we adults too, and we just call like there's nothing to it now, you know.
We didn't have any text messages.
No, there was. Well, I tell people, you know, when we were growing up, we didn't even have a telephone for a while. Now everybody has to have a cell phone.
Yeah.
You know, and that ages us too. I said we're celebrating our 50th year of being out of high school this year, and I said that makes you sound really, really old. So, but anyway, so y'all did get married.
Yes, right after we finished college. We graduated on the same day in two different states in May of '62, and then married in July.
So, well, that was, you know, a lot of people, if they go, especially 2 years of separation, you know, they find somebody else, or a lot of times. So
This was a long haul.
This must have been the real thing.
Yeah, it was.
It was.
All right, then after that, after you finished college and got married, and I'll let y'all take up from there and just tell us a little bit about your work and what you've done. I know you've worked mostly up north.
Yes, we went to Louisville where she taught school. She was a second grade school teacher in Louisville, and I was a student at Southern Baptist Seminary. And during that time, I was pastor of a church near Hardinsburg, out toward the river from Hardinsburg. And then the last year, I stayed after theology work and did a Master of Religious Education degree. And during that year, I worked in an African American church as part-time associate to the pastor. And from there we graduated and went to East St. Louis, Illinois. Worked in East St. Louis during the 60s. You talked about white flight earlier in Florida. We saw that, lived through some of that in East St. Louis. And I was on staff for a church that was a strong church in that town, but ended up relocating. I actually was part of the leadership team as we went through all that process of transition to move to Fairview Heights. Following that, we were more than 4.5 years pastor of a small church near Scott Air Force Base, Belleville, O'Fallon area.
And you said that you were part of a African American church.
Yes.
Wasn't that a unique experience?
It was in God's providence, it was a good experience for us. I sat next to a woman in a class who was a widowed pastor's wife, African American woman, and she had remarried to a deacon in this church, and they were looking for a staff position, someone to fill a staff position for youth and education, and she knew that I was interested in that kind of work. And so one day she just said to me before class as we talked, "You'd be just right for our church." And I just assumed she was not remembering all the facts of things and didn't take it too seriously. She came back the very next day to class and she said, "I told a pastor about you and he wants to meet you Sunday after worship." And so I went and interviewed with him, and 2 weeks later I was their Minister of Youth and Education. The Mount Zion Baptist Church at 22nd and Walnut, it was then. It's now Martin Luther King Boulevard in Louisville, West End. Delightful experience. I opened up what would have been a fairly closed, reserved style for worship leading, I think, naturally, to a more open, experiential expression of worship because of my time there, I think.
I'm sure that was a very unique experience, because one of the churches that I pastored, as I said, was like 40. It was anywhere from 40 to 45% African American, and mostly islanders, and it was quite a unique experience.
Yeah.
I mean, we had Jamaicans, Bahamians, and different islanders in there, as well as African Americans also. And so, but it was a great experience. I loved it.
Yeah.
I said, you've got to be called and have a heart for inner city ministry, or forget it. You can't handle it, you know.
Well, God was good to us. I probably learned more from them than they did from me. But it was a momentous time really for us. As it turns out, the pastor of the church was actually the brother of Martin Luther King Jr. And in that spring of '67, open housing legislation was being called for by the African American community. Urban renewal had demolished housing around the downtown area of Louisville, and they had outplaced or displaced people from their housing, so they would go to the next ring out and try to buy a house, and nobody'd sell. They couldn't buy even if they had financing. And so they started demonstrating for open housing legislation, and Pastor King would call me 3 or 4 times that spring on an afternoon. It'd be about 4 o'clock. He knew I'd be home from classes, and he would say, "We're going to march tonight. I want you to lead prayer meeting." So I would go to the church and lead prayer meeting, and he would be on the streets, and they would be singing "Oh Freedom" and "We Shall Overcome" and so forth. They would actually board a U-Haul rental truck, drive a mile, roughly, get out and sing their song and walk through the street. And so I did that in that relationship. And then we had a prayer vigil, I remember, at the courthouse. And one afternoon skipped some classes from seminary and went out and joined probably several hundred people, prayer vigil. And the result happened after we had finished seminary and left, but by the fall of '67, open housing legislation was passed successfully in Louisville.
Were you the first white staff member?
Yes.
I figured that because at that time I hired the first black African American staff members, and a black pianist for our church, and a youth director. In fact, the young man that we brought in as our youth director is now pastor of one of the largest African American churches in Miami.
Yeah.
Yes, several thousand members down there now. Yeah, I saw him on Christian television one night as he was being interviewed in there on TVN, and I said, I know that young man.
Well, that's rewarding to see that happen.
It really is. Yeah. So it was quite, like I say, it was quite an experience. And this girl, she could play the piano. And the thing about it was she had never been to church much, but we needed a pianist, so I put a little card up on junior college like here, and she responded, and she was almost within a stone's throw of the church. She says, Brother Paul, said, I've never played church music as such. I'm a classical pianist. And so I went out and bought some Dino Karsanakis song books, music books, and a couple of his albums back then, you know, and took them to her, and went back to see her a week later. She says, I never knew they played this kind of music in church, you know, the kind that he played. And so she took off with that, and boy, she could really play the piano. She could just make those songs walk and talk, you know. But it was a good experience that we had, because I know what you were doing there. But it was a tremendous experience.
I guess you know, I mentioned the providence of God earlier. I think that's an important theme in my life. The week before, this friend introduced me to her pastor. I had read, just because I never had read it before, I had read Uncle Tom's Cabin. And there's a sense in which that, I think, reading that book had almost predisposed me to accept that invitation. I'm not sure I would have otherwise. And it ended up recharting my direction in ministry, because we were anticipating a fairly typical small church pastorate. That's what I knew. That's what I grew up with here in West Kentucky. But because I was in this church, a church in East St. Louis, looking for a staff man, wanted somebody with experience in African American churching. And they said, we think you're right for us. And so I ended up being a staff person in that church that time.
You can't fight God's plan.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we're going to take a break, and Jeanetta's going to get with our nutritionist, and they're going to talk about healthy eating. I don't know what they're going to talk about today, but it's always about healthy eating. So we'll be back. You stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
We welcome Pam Ward back today. Pam is a registered dietitian at Western Baptist Hospital, and she comes to share with us each week. So what are we going to be talking about today, Pam?
Well, one of the biggest things I have people tell me that supposedly keeps them from eating right is I don't cook, or I don't have time to cook. And people equate good nutrition with
home cooking,
big meals, that type of thing. And it doesn't have to be that way. For people that cook minimally or not at all, there's some ways to get around, you know, the lack of nutrition. There's certainly ways to meet your needs and cook none or virtually none.
Well, some of the restaurants even have, you know, how many grams of fat it has in something.
They do.
Blah, blah, blah.
Blah, 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 yeah.
The other things that we need to know.
Yeah, and you know, most people don't want them on on a menu at a restaurant, because then they have to think about it. You know, they have to look at it and go, oh, that's got 30 grams of fat, whereas before they could just order it.
Do it without
and not
feeling
feel
guilty.
Yeah. And I'm not saying they won't order it, they'll just feel guilty about it. But each department in the grocery store, your produce, your dairy, your meat, your grains, all of them, there are good options for folks that don't want to cook, don't have time to cook, live by themselves, whatever it may be, but there's some good options. For example, from the produce section, you know, raw vegetables, any kind of raw vegetable is going to be a great option. If you're a big salad eater, don't just get the iceberg lettuce. Get some of those darker greens, spinach, those type of things, because that's where your nutrients are going to be. But cauliflower, peppers, tomatoes, broccoli, all those vegetables that you could eat raw. And if you want to take a little bit of low-fat salad dressing and use it as a dip, that's fine, it's not a problem. But all of those can be picked up in your produce section, you know, with no problem, and they're good options. And if you want to have a little something hot with them, stick a potato, a sweet potato, a yam, whatever it may be, in your microwave for a few minutes, and that way you've got something hot with your meal, but it doesn't require a great deal of effort. Any fruit is going to be a good option, and you know, we don't cook fruits. You want to get a variety. Don't eat I have a lot of people tell me, well, I eat a banana every morning and an apple every afternoon. That's fine, but throw a little variety in there because each fruit is higher in something than the others. So, put a little effort into it. Frozen vegetables are a real good option because you can just put them in the microwave, nuke them, and minimal fuss. Fruit juices. Now, fresh fruit is preferable because of the fiber and all those things, but fruit juices are a good option too, and particularly if you're a big soda drinker, substitute one of those sodas. Substitute one of those sodas with some juice.
Right, grape juice, orange juice.
Do make sure it's labeled 100% juice, that it's not. Yeah, a lot of those in the very fine print, it will say either contains no juice or contains 10% juice. So double check and make sure what you're getting is 100% real juice.
Yes, I have really noticed that.
Well, I messed up not long ago and grabbed the wrong thing because I was in a hurry and got home and 10% juice.
And these that call it like juice cocktail, that's mostly not juice.
Right, and if it says fruit drink on it, it's not juice. It's a fruit flavored thing. But just look and make sure it's 100% juice. And and speaking of things you can drink that are healthy, as I said, the juice is healthy. But people need to hit the dairy section too. And a lot of people don't drink milk, so they don't think about other calcium sources, and our body definitely needs them. But obviously, for no cooking, you've got milk, you've got yogurt, you've got cottage cheese, the soy milk that's fortified, that's a good option. The little, individually wrapped string cheese, that's a nice low-fat cheese, it makes a great snack. But there's several things in the dairy section, don't forget. Just don't forget. Most of us think about meat because we're big meat eaters, but even with the meat, you'll see anymore they've got the pre-cooked chicken, the pre-cooked whatever it may be. That's great to just cut up and put on a salad. It's very easy to do, no problem at all. Even the roasted chicken at Walmart, Kroger, whatever it may be, if you'll pull the skin off, that's not a bad option, but you've got to pull the skin off because that's where most of the fat is. And I have a lot of people say, but that's the part I like. It's one of those weigh it out. Which one is more important? That's right. Which one is more important to you? Salmon, canned salmon, is a good option. Watch your deli meats, particularly if you're having to watch your sodium. For some reason, they tend to be very high in salt, but some of them are very good choice. Ham is a good choice, turkey is a good choice. All of those cause no problems, and they're good options. As far as meat goes, if you want to try to cook something and you want to cook it quickly, fish is very easy to cook. You can cook it rather quickly. I think it's 5 minutes per half inch of width, so you can cook chicken or fish in 15 minutes or less.
And you can fix it on the grill.
Sure you can.
Which is very good.
It is good.
Yeah.
It is good. You can do it that way too. Our grains, most people that's not so much of a problem for. Whole grain cereal is a great option for breakfast, especially if you'll throw a little bit of fruit in with it, your milk, you've got a well-balanced meal. If you buy bread, make sure it's whole wheat. Pita pockets are a great option because you can just stuff your vegetables, stuff your meat in there, and you can literally take it out the door and eat it. So it's very easy for people. Dried beans, great choice.
And I found out that you can buy a can of dried beans.
Oh yeah.
Rather, if it's just 2 of you, that's about all.
That's about it. Yeah, and
what you need.
I was somewhere the other day, and they now have vegetables you can steam in the bag. You don't even take them out of the bag. You stick the bag in the microwave, and we tried them, and they're very good. And, virtually no fat, so that's a great option. People might want to look for those. And again, it's a minimum of fuss because you just pop it in there, turn the microwave on, and 5 minutes it's done.
Okay, well listen, thanks for sharing with us again, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
I'll be here.
Welcome back. I'm Jim Pollard with my wife Jeanetta, co-host, and today we have with us some old school friends of hers, and they're talking about things that have happened in the past, where they've been, the work they've done, Norm and Patty, and they talk about the different things that they've done. So Jeanetta, I'm going to let you get back in there. You're going to talk about some Maryland stuff, right?
Yes.
What was your job up in Maryland?
Well, I had worked part-time with the association in East St. Louis, assisting the director of missions. And what is now the North American Mission Board of our denomination introduced me to an association in the mountains, western Maryland, and introduced me as a potential associational missionary. And we accepted that call and went to the mountains to work with 17 churches and spent 10 years as appointees of the North American Mission Board there. We were both appointed for that work. Our boys basically grew up there.
You want to talk to us a little bit about that, Patty? Because they do, in some ways, have a different culture up there a little bit from the South. And
Well, our boys were 6 and 3 when we moved there, and so they spent most of their school years there. And I was a stay-at-home mom, and so I volunteered in the school and worked in the elementary school with helping the slower children in reading, and enjoyed that work. And they would come home to Kentucky to visit grandparents and cousins, and they would think this is the greatest place on earth. And but then when we moved from Maryland to another place, that was the greatest place on earth.
yeah, it's
Not
great that
Maryland
they
was,
felt that way.
Yes, so they missed their friends there, and the next move was very hard for them when we went to Minnesota, because they were in 8th grade and 10th grade, and so they really did have a hard time adjusting. And
We made conscious decision that as long as the children were young, she would stay at home if we could afford it financially. So we didn't have things we might have had otherwise in terms of stuff, but she stayed at home until our youngest son was in the middle of his junior year in high school. And you worked with Cub Scouts as a leader.
yes, I was a Cub Scout leader and den mother, and went to Cub Scout day camp with them when they were in their Cub Scout years, and enjoyed that.
Patty and the boys were part of 2 church starts where I was the first pastor for a start church. And we hosted Bible classes in our home, Bible studies. And we had 3 homes that kind of rotated in the neighborhood where we were living. And so we started that congregation, and another congregation about 14 miles downriver from Cumberland, Maryland, on the Potomac River at a place called Old Town. We cultivated that community with what we call a backyard Bible club, and just went door to door and inquired would there be interest in the beginning of a church that would be a Baptist church. And we found 5 or 6 families that said we're interested. And so a couple of months went by, and we sent out invitations for an awareness meeting. And at the volunteer fire hall, 5 or 6 families showed up, and 4 of them decided that they wanted to do this. It was in a place out in the woods, really, along the river, away from town. Drive about 14 miles to get into town to the larger churches. There were some small, weak congregations there in the area, but not real strong churches. And so that congregation is alive and well, very much involved in the community today. Is a satisfying year for us, and Pat and the boys are much part of that.
And you have one son fixing to go to Iraq.
Yes, he's mobilized now to Camp Shelby in Mississippi in preparation for deployment to Iraq in July.
And he's a chaplain?
He's a chaplain now.
Had he been pastoring or?
No, he was business administration major in Belmont University, and his last year of college, I saw him as we visited Christmas and said, well, I guess you're going to get your resume out now this spring. And he looked at me and had a kind of an awkward grin. He said, well, actually, Pop, I'm thinking about seminary. And he'd never spoken of seminary before. He was an infantry guy, you know, and so what does this mean? I asked him that, and he says, well, you know, I know a lot of guys coming in through the Army, and he says they need spiritual counsel and help. He says a lot of these guys are struggling, and he said I think I have a calling to do that. And so he became a chaplain and continues now that he's in Texas with the Texas National Guard with an infantry unit. So he knows the infantry part, and has served once 2 years ago for a year, and will be going back. That means that next week I go to Cub Scout day camp as the parent for our grandson.
In place of your
in
son.
In place of Charles. Yeah.
In Texas?
In Texas, Fort Worth.
Yeah.
Well, that's great, and I'm sure that it thrills you. Although I know you have, of course, feelings about going to Iraq because you know that there is
tough.
danger. But for the work, and he's right. These soldiers do need guidance. They need people to help them.
Well, it's a big upheaval in the lives of the National Guard people because they already have their lives established somewhat, and changes things.
We discovered that in the first Iraq War. I was still doing Santa in the malls, and the first time that it really hit me with both parents was I thought the lady who brought the two small children in was their grandmother, and they were like 6 and 8, and sat on my lap, and that one of their statements was the thing that we really would like is for mother and dad to come home.
Both parents.
Both parents,
Yeah.
and the grandmother came over at the time and said she identified herself as the grandparent and said they're both in the military, and one is in Korea and one is in Iraq.
Yeah.
And I said, we think about one parent going, but then all of a sudden, if both parents are out there, it's really a psychological hardship on those kids for one thing, and then for the grandparent or somebody to take care of the kids, it becomes a double hardship case for them. And that really hit me as to what was happening in some of the lives where both of them were military families. It's a military family, both in the military now. And we had that year we had more than one occasion where that happened, where they'd come in and talk about that, because I was seeing a lot of kids. Well, Norman, Patty, we really appreciate y'all being with us today. It's been really encouraging and to hear about what you've done and that you're continuing to do work. And we want to encourage our viewers to continue to watch our program each and every week. Remember that you can see the show now on your computer. It's being streamed on the internet. It's Paducah, the number 2, paducah2.org, and then go through the college website over till you find the television, and you can even watch it on the internet, or you can download it and watch it later, which is exciting for us that now the show is worldwide. So we want to encourage you to do that. If you want to write us, and we encourage you to write us, Jeanetta, what's our
P.O. Box 7, Bose, Kentucky 42027.
Remember now, use it or lose it.
Can't see as well as I used to. Can't run as far or as fast. Sometimes I think that the old me is becoming exactly that. But when I start thinking of all I don't have, that's when I tell